Hey there, church. Welcome to our midweek musing here this week of January the 25th. Hope everybody's staying safe and warm as best as you can. We sadly couldn't gather this week for Bible study, so I know there's a few more people that are going to be watching this. I'm realizing now as I've hit record on this video that this was a very bad sweater choice for this day because I'm kind of blending into the wall here in my office, but we're going to get through it. And so I think it'll be this week, as we continue in this series that we're doing in the book of Genesis. We're preaching through it, we're doing studies through it, we're reading through it every single day. I've heard great feedback from you all about doing the reading plan. I hope that you all are enjoying it, starting off the year in a new way. I mean, I've heard from younger people, older people, everybody who's doing it is having a great time with it and just really diving back into these stories that we might have remembered from many years ago, stories that were a lot of really good vacation Bible school stories. Maybe reading them closely for the first time in a long time is a really wonderful opportunity for us to start off this new year, diving into scripture this way. And so it's been a joy to walk through it with you all. And today we're going to talk about Jacob and Esau and this with their dad Isaac and their mom Rebekah, and this story of blessing and birthright that we get in Genesis. So we're going to look at Genesis 25 and Genesis 27, just kind of walking through this story that's a little hard to understand what's going on at one point. Why does it matter type of thing? But it's a big deal because I think one of the biggest idea of it is the fact that Jacob is the second born and is yet the one who is favored, right? We're going to hear this in Genesis chapter 25, but we also are able to think through a lot of other places in Scripture where the second born is favored over the first, right? I mean, technically, Cain and Abel, Abel was first, Cain is second, and Cain kills Abel. I don't know if that was necessarily favored, but it was at least the idea that it was, but this continues throughout Scripture. There's other people that we're going to hear about are in the book of Genesis, and there's other people that we hear about throughout all of Scripture that show us how sometimes the firstborn is not the one that is seen most highly. But it's also weird that God would work so in the midst of such deception, right? That we think of God being above reproach, we think of God being holy and just and all of these ways, but yet in this story specifically, especially with Rebekah, we hear such deceit at work within this idea of getting Jacob the blessing. And that seems to be very unlike God. We would want God to be just. We would want God to stand up for righteousness, to stand up for the way that things are supposed to be done. But there's also this way that God continues to choose the secondborn, continues to choose those who are not the typical one to be chosen by the world standards. And so it just is interesting to see how it works through this. So we hear in Genesis chapter 25, if you guys wanted to start in verse 19, that we are, and feel free to pause this video if you want to read if you want to read the rest of Genesis 25 for starting in verse 19, and then we're going to get to 20 and then pick up with the video again. You can do that. But we hear that Isaac has married Rebekah, and Rebekah is pregnant, and she is going through it, pregnant with twins, and she is very concerned about all of the pains and hurts and feelings that she has going on. And she prays to the Lord, why is it that I'm dealing with this? And God tells her how you have two great nations within your womb. They are going to lead great people, but they are going to be divided. And the younger one is going to be master to the older one. It really says like the elder will serve the younger is what a lot of the versions of Scripture say. And that is a big deal, right? Because as the eldest son, I would like to believe that I was the one who was the rightful one to get, that my brother should serve me, not me serve him, right? In those ways. So this one comes with a lot of feelings for us firstborn ones. But then we see as these two kids are born, right? Esau and Jacob, that Esau is born first. He is hairy, he is ruddy, he is a man's man as a baby, right? Type of thing is this vision that we have of this like baby born with all this red hair. And then coming out of the womb, he is holding on to Esau's ankle is Jacob. And that's where the word Jacob, the name Jacob, comes from, this idea of grabbing at the heel. And we're going to also hear how it's maybe seen that he is the one that is not favored by his father as much, that Esau is favored by Isaac Jacob is favored by Rebekah. And so that's why there's this little interplay between the characters at work in this story. And so we hear at the end of chapter 25 this story of Jacob stealing the birthright, or the stealing or bartering for the birthright. And so we get this story of Esau is famished. He comes in from hunting. He's hungry. He is just can't see straight. He can't even think straight. And he sees Jacob making this food, making this stew, and in the kitchen. And he comes by and says, I need it. I want it. I don't care what it is that I have to give to you in order to do it, in order to have it. I want it right now. And so Jacob seizes the opportunity and says, give me your birthright. Right? Which is a kind of a weird phrase. We don't really use that in our language today. But what it really means is that, like, give me your share of the inheritance. So not only we can trade what it is that we're going to get. As the firstborn, the typical way in which it was done was that they get a double portion of the inheritance. So if there were 10 kids in the family, like there was a lot of kids in the families at this point, right? If there's 10 kids in the family, it wasn't split 10 ways evenly. It was split 11 ways, and one of them got 2, and the oldest one got 2, right? So it's a very different way of thinking about it. And so the fact that Esau is famished, is so hungry, he just says, here, you can have it. Shows you a lot of one, how hungry he was, but also this idea of that Esau was very short-sighted, wasn't willing to wait for the blessing in which he was going to get, and Jacob was willing to let it play out, right? It says a lot for us in this very instant world that we live in, that we want to see these things checked off. We want to get instant gratification, instant feedback for what it is that's going on in our life, that sometimes we have to wait for that reward in our life. Jumping to Genesis 27, right? So Esau's given up this birthright at the end of 25. Jacob's living with it. And we also remember this story that Rebekah had been told by God that the elder son is going to serve the younger, right? That the younger son is going to be the favored one by God, the one who's going to be the lineage of it. It makes you wonder if Rebekah ever told Isaac this story about what she had in this vision that she had, or that God came to her in her dream. Did she tell Isaac this, or did she keep it to herself? Because we hear at the beginning of chapter 27, Isaac is getting older in years. He can't see straight. He can barely hear, barely see, is nearing death, and he's wanting to give his blessing, right? And this is, if we were to use our language today, it is, I'm going to read my last will and testament and tell you, sons, how I really feel about you and what it is that I'm going to give you in this way, right? And so it's a kind of a beautiful thing. It's this blessing in which he's going to say over the kids in the moment. But at the beginning of chapter 27, he only says that he's going to share it with Esau. And Rebekah is almost like eavesdropping out in the hallway and hears that Isaac says this to Esau. Esau runs off to go and kill an animal and make it into a great meal for Isaac so that he could have his last meal before he dies, practically is the way that this is reading for us. And Rebekah starts to come up with this plan, right? Because she knows what God has told her. She knows how the younger son is supposed to be favored over the older son. And so she concocts this plan that gets Jacob the blessing. And we've probably, if you haven't read it before, you can read it now, or you can just remember this story of how she dresses Jacob up in Esau's clothes. They go and they kill a couple of the young goats that they had in their herd, and they cook those up the way that Isaac likes it, and they take some of the goat skin and put it on Jacob's like exposed skin, so that when he carries the meal into his father's room and says, here, I have brought you what you've asked for. This is Esau, your son. It's not Esau, it's Jacob doing it. But he's saying to him, hey, here is this, give me the blessing that is bestowed upon me. And even Isaac doesn't know if he's like, something seems off with this, because it sounds like Jacob, but it smells like Esau, sounds like Esau, like all these different things. And so when he comes close to him and he smells the clothes and he touches the skin and feels how hairy it is, he's like, oh, this is Esau. Let me give you this blessing. And he gives him this blessing of abundance, of dominance, of lordship, and of covenantal promise, and says this over Jacob, not over Esau. And the way that the story is written in chapter 27, it's like Jacob hears this blessing, gives thanks for it, and walks out of the room. And about the time that he walks out of the room, in walks Esau with his prepared meal, ready to receive his blessing. And it's like, oh gosh, you can imagine this in the movies of it being tricked around in those ways. I always think of this story along with those Mission Impossible scenes where Tom Cruise is wearing the masks that like make it look like he's really and sounds like somebody else, and then he rips it off after he gets the very important info or steals the whatever in Mission Impossible, and everything is saved and those sorts of things. That's kind of what happens with Esau as he walks in the room. The wool is pulled over their eyes, and they Isaac and Esau realize what it is that Jacob and Rebekah have done. And sadly, this blessing that Isaac has to offer over his children, it's a one-time deal. Like once you say it, it's bonded, it is law, it is written in stone practically in these cultures at that time. And so sadly, he doesn't have a blessing to offer over Esau. And what he ends up saying to Esau is practically the inverse of what he says to Jacob. That when Jacob has abundance, Esau is going to have little. When Jacob is going to have lordship over all of the siblings, Esau is going to serve Jacob. When they are going to have like all of these things that typically should go to the firstborn are now going to the secondborn, and the firstborn is receiving the not as great options as we see in this story. And so it obviously Esau responds very poorly, as any of us probably would in that situation. Says that he's going to kill his brother, and their mother Rebekah hears of this and gets Jacob the heck out of Dodge as quickly as possible and sends him off to her side of the family so that he can find somebody of that tribe to marry. And that's kind of where we end off in chapter 27, is this story of Jacob running off to figure out what it is that is, find himself a wife, get away from his brother who's super angry. And so it's going to be interesting to see as we continue to read through Genesis the way that this comes back into the fold. And so it's interesting just to read this story because it makes us wonder, like I asked, right? How is God at work in the midst of deception, right? Not that there's a lot of deceiving that goes on in our lives, a lot of things that wool gets pulled over our eyes all the time, but it's a wonder to us of where God is still at work in it. And so it's a little difficult to figure out where that is and kind of believe that God is at work in the midst of this. And still to see what it is that's going on. But it's important for us to continue to see it in those ways. And so there's a lot of different ways and things that we could dive into even deeper. Sadly, if we would have gathered together for Bible study, we could have talked about it a little more. But it's just an interesting story to see the ways that God is still at work in this family's life, continuing to follow this lineage that he promised to Abraham and to Isaac and now to Jacob, that he will be with them through all of this. So I hope this Bible study little talk through is good for you, just to kind of reflect on this story and think about it a little bit deeper. Makes us wonder and question for ourselves where it is that God is at work and what we learn about persistence and belief and trying to make sure that you get what is yours, or whatever the type of ways that we think of the way the world works versus the way that God works in our life. So often we see a lot of it in this Jacob and Esau story. Sadly, many of us might have stories with our siblings that did not go well over an inheritance. It did not go well over a blessing. A parent said something to one that we always wanted to be said to us. It's very difficult for us to listen to this story and read this story and not have our own personal feelings come up. And so it's just an opportunity for us to just think through what it means to be blessed by God rather than blessed by man, right? That these ways that God speaks sometimes means more than what it does that the world typically gives to us. So one commentary that I read said something about it's not just fate, it's destiny. This idea that it's not just that sometimes God's will is going to be done in a way that is very different from the ways that the cards are dealt in our life. And so we have to just kind of come to terms with it. And we're going to see that with Esau as well as the story continues to unfold. So just keep reading and let's see what we learn from Jacob and Esau together. Peace, y'all.